Greetings, everybody. Hopefully you can see me. We're live. We're back in the studio. Welcome to our second multicast on X and YouTube. We're now also streaming on Telegram. Hopefully you should see the banner at the top and the Telegram channel, and you should see me now. Shout out to all the checkmates and community listening in. Business Development, Sal de Pares. I'm your host, community man, Matt Arnold. Today is Thursday, the 27th of February. And if you're just hearing about us now for the first time, you can head over to our YouTube channel. You can take a look back at the first session that we did, where we basically brought a fresh look, a new reintroduction into who Cheqd is, what we do, and also to try and understand where we are as the tide shifts in SSI and decentralized identity. In short, we are the infrastructure for the trusted data economy. You can learn more on our website at cheqd.io. You can find lots of information in our blogs, use cases, and you can also find links to join our community. As with all of these sessions, like our previous AMAs, I do have to start with the disclaimer. I know a lot of people will get very tired of hearing me say this, but it has to be done for all of the right reasons. The Cheqd token is a utility token. It is not a security. We are not offering an investment opportunity, and nothing we discuss today is to be taken as financial advice. And with and that is one of our advisors and SSI OG, Nikki Hickman. Some of you might not know who Nikki is, but Nikki's been in the space for a little bit of time now, and Nikki's got some good insights into SSI. Sal, could you please bring in Nikki? Let's have a quick chat with Nikki.
Hi, Matt.
Hi, Nikki. How are you? Are you well?
Yeah, very good, thanks.
Good. I'm just getting a report that, can you hear me okay? Is everything all right on my audio?
I can hear you now,
No
but
problem.
you have had a few little flickers.
Interesting. Okay, I'll keep an eye on that. Well, thanks very much for joining us today. I do realize it was short notice, Nikki, but for those who may not know who you are, what you've done, could you please give us a brief introduction of your background and how it is you became to be an advisor for Cheqd?
Yeah, sure. So I'm like a digital product and innovation manager, and I've been working with digital identity for like big brands like Vodafone, Barclays, Sky, Verizon. I've been working with digital identity for about 20 years, and about 6 years ago, I started working with the Sovereign Foundation, this weird blockchain idea, which was the starting point for self-sovereign identity and decentralized identity.
Lovely. Thank you. So I just picked up on something you said there, this weird idea of blockchain. Was this something that was not really on the radar there at the time when you joined, or before you joined?
Well, obviously we were aware of blockchain, but the idea of using it for digital identity or personal data of any kind was a bit of an anathema. You know, the idea that you'd have an immutable record when the essence of data protection is, you know, you can forget stuff and you should be able to delete things and change things and move things. But obviously I'm not a technical person. So once I understood about DIDs and all that kind of capability, and the data was really not running on the blockchain at all, it was all cool.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject, and there's so much to dive into. I know you ran a session with Anka yesterday, so we're going to take a little bit of dive into that for now. I'm just going to slide you back in with Sal, and we're going to bring in Anka and Fraser. So Sal, if you wouldn't mind just sliding Nikki backstage, please, and if we could just bring in Anka and Fraser. All right, gentlemen, hey, you're here. Is my sound okay still?
Yeah, yes. You just fine.
How are you both doing anyway? You well? I know it's been a bit of a week, particularly for you as well, Fraser.
Jet lag still. So we'll get onto it, but it's been an intense 2 weeks. So did a conference last week in Cape Town, which was fantastic. It was really cool. Looking forward to sharing that. And then ETH Denver this week, which again, fantastic in a very, very, very different way. but the jet lag is killing me. Woke up at 4:30 this morning, but means I'm somehow still roughly on top of all the things that I'm meant to be doing for my day job, whilst being able to spend the rest of the day networking. So it has its silver linings, but I'm going to be shattered by Sunday, I think.
Well, best of luck for the rest of the week, Fraser. I just want to dive in straight away into the first topic because I know there's a few hard stops and things. So straight away, we've just put in our latest proposal discussion, which is around USDC as a denomination. So Sal, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to load up a web page just so we can direct it. And then hopefully in a moment, you should actually get a prompt to load that page. And if you wouldn't mind, if you could please just load that on screen. Lovely. Thank you. Okay. So Fraser, I want to talk about stable coins for a second before we dive into this, because some people obviously, well, largely a lot of people will know what they are. But let's talk about at the very base level. What is a stable coin?
Oh God, I'm not sure I'm qualified for that. I feel like it's a constant debate. But effectively, it's a token cryptocurrency that is, rather than free floating, is anchored to some sort of fiat currency. So USDC, USDT are probably the most well known, but there are others out there. I think you had. There was a bunch of others, but I think one of the big changes you're starting to have is they're starting to be regulated, which is a big move forward. So the likes of Mika in Europe, and then there's regulation I think coming in elsewhere as well. But they are, I'd say, probably if we think about crypto having PMF, product market fit, stable coins are probably one of the best examples where people are using them for paying each other, especially cross-border, and it is so much cheaper than existing or historical kind of remittance systems. So yeah, I'm not sure that's a particularly good definition. Maybe Anchor's got a better one, but for me it's kind of a token that is anchored to some sort of fiat currency rather than being kind of abstract or a utility token, governance token.
I wasn't gonna do a better job than that, so
it was a good answer. But what I wanted to start to think more a little bit about is especially with the Mika side of things, is the difference between a stable coin and then a Mika compliant stable coin. And there's a very good reason why we chose USDC as part of the first beta for what I'm labeling as the next iteration of payment rails. I don't know whether that's an accurate description, but I guess I'm just going to run with it for now. Please forgive me. But the many different kinds of Mika stable coins, and over the past 4-5 years or so, we've seen different iterations and AMA licenses for different types. But when we think about a Mika stablecoin, is why would we use it? So why have we chosen, Fraser, in the first instance, to use USDC as a Mika compliant stablecoin for this first beta for fee denomination?
Well, you kind of answered it in the question, or at least half of it anyway. So the fact that USDC is MiCA compliant or Mika compliant is big. I'll come back to that in a second, but I think there's also a technical reason why we chose USDC within that cohort. There is already a USDC check pair on Osmosis. And so Anchor's better place to explain this, so I won't go into it in too much detail, but effectively what is happening whenever you use USDC to interact with the network is it's being converted on the fly via Osmosis and then resolved down into check, which is then burnt for the utility. So it's the first kind of step in, like, because that pool already exists, it's the first step in testing this functionality out in prod. And then depending on how that goes, we can start widening those options up to, say, kind of BTC, ETH, kind of Euro stable coins, and just looking at others. But again, they'd always be resolved down into check ultimately. If I then come back to the Mika compliance stuff, so like we've kind of identified in the people that we work with, our partners, and then the pipeline of people in like other SSI vendors or companies out there in the market. We're now working, I would say, with almost everyone who is comfortable holding check. I think, like I would say, we've pretty much like got that pipeline locked down. The good thing that kind of USDC and MiCA regulations opens up is, say, organizations that have a bit more of a low tolerance for risk, or they maybe have certain requirements that don't allow them to hold tokens which are unregulated. Right. And then this then allows them to go and adopt the network in a way that previously would have been difficult for them. So it basically takes like our world of organizations that we've been working with and expands the population of people that can go and adopt cheqd. And obviously the first one is USDC. I think our ambition is that we will, as we understand, like, one, we need to make sure it works, but then go beyond that and start adopting other MiCA regulated tokens to make sure that people have that coverage. But it really comes down to that regulated side. I guess the final thing is as well, it means that there is that kind of like stable payment side of things, or the stable amount that you're kind of dealing with. And one of the things that we're looking at in the background that's on the roadmap is shifting pricing for identity transactions and transactions in general into stable dollar or fiat terms. So what that will mean is, kind of regardless of what is happening with cheqd, the actual price for identity transactions, for ledger transactions in general, is static, which is kind of crucial for adoption by enterprise, because they don't want price exposure. They want to know exactly what they're paying, especially at volume, and managing that out. So it's all like, there's an immediate part of it, which is this widens the kind of population that can go and adopt the network, but also it kind of sets us up for the future where we manage to stabilize prices into dollar terms or fiat terms, and it just makes the whole thing a lot more seamless. So that's a long ramble, I guess, a jet-lagged ramble.
No, it's good. I was actually really excited about this one. I think I'll anchor back to some of the comments that I made towards Tassos at the end of that call. When I heard it, I was actually really excited. I'm not going to say it on the live stream right now. But just taking it back a little bit, yes, we understand we're going towards the MiCA side for all of the reasons that you've mentioned. But where did it all start? Some people might be curious as to, well, what is a payment rail, and what was the first iteration? You know, how did it come to be? Why is it our USP? So Anchor, if you wouldn't mind, before we dive a little bit more into this from the technical side, could you give us an overview of what the first iteration of payment rails was?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for the people who are joining in for the first time, when we talk about payment rails within cheqd network, it is essentially envisioned as a family of different products that we have that help people in a privacy-preserving fashion monetize digital credential exchanges. Because obviously our network enables people to go and issue digital tamper-proof credentials. But what we often encountered is in the absence of having like an economic model as to why should a piece of data move from one place to another, or the digital credentials move from one place to another, we found that people weren't really taking the jump. So what we have built and has been available on our network is the first iteration of the payment rails. Essentially allows you to set a price for checking whether the status of a credential is currently valid, or if it has been revoked since the time it was issued. The analogy is, if you've got a driver's license, you might have an expiry date on that, which might be 5 or 10 years out into the future since when it was issued. But you could also have that same driver's license be revoked if you report that the driver's license was lost or stolen by someone. And so even before that expiry date comes along, you can have the digital credential, let's say, get revoked. And what we think it sort of creates is a bit of a mixed model where you still have the same international specifications and standards, like the W3C verifiable credentials, using which these verifiable credentials or digital credentials are expressed. But you can start monetizing that as an issuer to say, in some use cases which require a high degree of assurance, perhaps the recipient or the person that is seeing that digital credential can pay and check that the credential is still valid since the time it was issued. And that uses a lot of clever cryptography behind it. It uses a lot of zero-knowledge proofs. It uses a key sharding so that we can go and fully do this in a decentralized fashion. But ultimately, what it allows is it allows businesses to have some sort of business model behind why they should go and issue credentials in the first place.
Lovely. Thank you, Anka. And this is exactly what we mean on the website from the marketing side when we talk about commercial models and monetizing data and monetizing identity, whether it's issue appears the verifiable, it doesn't matter how you do it. It's being able to extract that value back. So let's dive into this governance proposal discussion, because for me, I do genuinely think this is a big step forward. I mean, others might think otherwise, but I know you mentioned, especially it's in the. I tell you what, let me not talk. Anka, could you talk us through this proposal, and also if you could give us an idea on the simulations you were running, because you mentioned you ran a couple of simulations. I'm curious to know what these simulations told you and what they haven't told you, which is why I'm going to the beta.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. So right now, if you go and write something onto the cheqd network, which is the cryptographic proofs that make sure that the digital credentials are not tampered, those are called decentralized identifiers. You can also go and write other files that might be needed for the trust around that credential. Some of the things that we talk about here is, what does the credential look like? What is it? What should it be visually represented as? Status lists, like, has it been revoked since the time that it was issued? Or trust registries. That's been a big topic in a lot of these different places. So every single one of those right now has a fixed price in cheqd tokens that is charged, and that is set by decentralized governance. So anybody on the network can go and talk about raising or lowering those prices. But what it does require is that people need to go and hold a balance of cheqd tokens in their wallets to go and execute. What we are trying to do with this proposal is use a module from Osmosis called fee abstraction that allows you to specify the fees that need to be paid in a different currency or a different token. The first one that we want to test out is USDC, the canonical version of that, which is issued by Noble on the Cosmos ecosystem. And what that will then mean is any developer who wants to go and make these identity rights on the network, they don't need to hold cheqd tokens. They just need to hold any of these micro-regulated stablecoins like USDC within their wallet. And by that wallet, I mean their wallet on Osmosis and not their wallet on cheqd, because that is the system within which it gets converted from, say, USDC to cheqd or any other stablecoin to cheqd. What the fee abstraction module then allows us to do is, once that conversion happens, for us to be able to send a message back to our network and still carry out the burns that happen with regarding to the sort of the identity transaction burns that we happen in our network. There's a governance set parameter that says 99% of that fee gets burnt. So that still happens, but it at least allows us to coordinate the action of, like, going from one token denomination to another using that Osmosis fee abstraction module. So we can simulate parts of this. Obviously, when you go and convert tokens on a DEX, it takes a while for that transaction to get finalized. It might take a while for those transactions to, or the fact that has happened, to come back over things called inter-blockchain communication, or IBC relays. So those things, in the simulation, they happen in close to like 0 or near 0 seconds. But in reality, it often does take a bit longer than that, in the range of a couple of seconds. So we want to launch this as a beta first with a single denom, so that we can go and see how does that work with the actual timings of the bridging that happens across different networks? And once we have that sort of figured out, we'd be able to publish much better guidance to developers on, for example, being able to say, once you've submitted an identity transaction to go write a DID, how long is it before you know that that has succeeded or it has failed? Which is instantaneous when you do it on our current network using the native token, but it's a bit more complicated when you're trying to coordinate it across multiple blockchains. And so hopefully, once we can run those actual real live tests, we can figure out what the real sort of edge cases are and be able to write up all of the guidance across all of the different industry SDKs that we are in, like Credo and Aries Cloud Agent Python, which a lot of our developers use, Doc, of course, as well, who's using this as well, and be able to give them much more tangible guidance on how to go and use this feature.
Lovely. Thanks very much for the details on that, Angar. I'm looking forward to see how this actually pans out. To me, this is a big piece of work moving forward because I know what's going to be coming next. So the governance proposal, we should be expecting to get that out fairly soon. We shall make sure that the community is aware of that in due course. Going to move on now to the next topic now. So we recently announced a hackathon, which we're in collaboration with DoraHacks and Sprite Plus. It's got quite a big prize pool, actually, of in check $50,000, important. And that's to create identity-driven verifiable AI with check. But this is not the first time this has happened, though, is it, Angar? Because there was a session that ran at the diff, right? There was a similar one. Could you talk us through some of the entries in that one?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we ran this last year with the Decentralized Identity Foundation's hackathon that usually takes place around November, October every single year. And our challenge there was to work with verifiable AI as well. The winning entry that we got in that actually used a feature on our network called DID linked resources, so decentralized identifier linked resources, to create an audit trail or history of every single sort of action or response that was given by a chatbot like an LLM, so that you can follow that up later and see that this particular response was given at a certain time. So that was fascinating to look at. We obviously want to have been building into a lot more SDKs, a lot more guidance around how to go build on verifiable AI that has happened since that particular time. So I'm excited to find out what sort of projects do people build on this one. The hackathon itself is over the next sort of 2 months. The deadline to submit is by the 2nd of May. So there's a solid amount of time that people can spend hacking and building on it. And yeah, no, excited to see what people come up with. Fraser, you've been behind a lot of this with DoraHacks as well. So I don't know if you want to add something there.
Probably only just the focus and what we would love to see. So like Angar said, we saw a really good solution, which was like an audit trail using DLRs into doing an audit trail from LLM into DID resources. It's a bit of a sneak peek into stuff that we'll cover later on around ETH Denver, but there's definitely a move on the agentic side to start I don't think anyone's got a solution yet, although I would say we do, around trust registries and providing generally trust frameworks and permissioning and all that kind of stuff around agents. There's a really big acknowledgement that it's almost like the Wild West of agents out there at the moment. A lot of them appearing, disappearing. And I think there's starting to be a lot more grown-up conversations around you need to know who's running what, who built it, and having kind of negotiations between these different between these different agents. So I think I think that's one thing where we've kind of split the hack into two tracks. So one side is more on the agentic side, so exactly what we're just discussing around permissioning systems or anything else, like using kind of credentials within an agent to go and fulfill something. Separately, we've then kind of like bucketed it into like other verifiable AI solutions, things like content credentials, verifiable data sets, all that kind of jazz. And verifiable, I'd say content credentials is probably another thing that we're like really hot on. Obviously, Alex contributes a lot to the specs in CTPA, CAI, but I think that's kind of more the flavor of we'd love to see some solutions there or surprise us. I think the beauty of hackathons is you never know what's going to show up, and you never we'll probably see ideas come through that we wouldn't have even expected. So yeah, really looking forward to that side of things. And I think if anyone does have any ideas or want to meet up, like if you happen to be in East Denver and you're looking at this, just keep an eye on my Twitter on where I'm going to be over the next couple of days, and just hunt me down. I think the final thing, won't give too many details, but I believe Verida are in the process of adding a bounty in as well. So hopefully that'll be in there in the next couple of days, but hopefully there should be an additional bounty from Verida, which we'll be announcing. Yeah, and if anyone else is listening this and fancies chucking in a bounty, you would be more than welcome. Just get in touch.
Lovely. Thanks very much for running over that. And just some key details about the hackathon. So as we mentioned, there is a $50,000 prize pool in check. So the pre-registration is open. You're free to make your submissions anytime from the 3rd of March, but why would you want to, right? You might as well just keep perfecting it and reach for the deadline, which is currently set at the 2nd of May. Although I said currently, we don't expect that changing anytime soon. So yes, make sure to get those entries in. I'm very interested to see what you guys come up with, because there's lots of different ways that we can build. And I'm going to paint a picture shortly about why trust in AI for me personally, from a personal perspective, is incredibly important. So don't forget, we'll be providing updates at the end of the hackathon. So the judges are set at the moment. So as you can see, we've got the judging panel. We've got our very own Anka Tassos, our head of engineering, Ryan Chris from Verida, Mortaz, the founder of VLT, and Mark Elliott, the director at Sprite Plus. Right. So this is where I want to break down some of the other bits of AI. So I've been spending a bit of time going over some of the most recent developments, and Sal, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to throw up a different screen share now, and it's around about the idea of humanoids building humanoids, right? Now, this is probably expected from a manufacturing perspective. We all knew that, big manufacturing would end up using autonomous machines, for example. But when we start to get towards robots building robots, it's like, well, yeah, okay, that's great. And then if we move forward, so this is a company called Apptronic. And a quick strap line is one of a number of companies building humanoid robots for industrial applications, including Agility, Boston Dynamics, Figure, Tesla, a few of these. And they've announced its robots are going to be deployed beyond the initial pilot phase. And then I discovered this article. Hopefully you can see this same screen. This was on MSN, and it's about another side of using robotic tech. Now we're at a stage where you've got materials that can mimic living systems, and they can be changed. They're like separate autonomous robots shaped like discs resembling small hockey pucks, and they can be assemble themselves into various shapes and exhibit adjustable material strengths, which is like, right, okay. And then there's this post anchor, which is yours. Hopefully you can see that one, which is actually one that you put up, and it was around these little guys. Anka, what are we looking at here?
Sorry, I can explain this one. So it's an interesting sort of example of agent-to-agent communication. We often think of that as happening through text chat, or like, a ChatGPT sort of like, talking to another one. This example was from the hackathon of a company called 11 Labs that creates synthetic voices. So, for example, they have a partnership with Spotify on how to narrate an audiobook, because Spotify does have audiobooks now. So instead of going and hiring a professional actor to read out some text, you could use a very lifelike and human-like voice using the 11 Labs AI. Anyway, so what we have in this example is on the sort of like, the phone on the right-hand side, it was an AI agent calling in a venue to ask if they could book it for a wedding, and if it's available on a certain date, if it can accommodate the number of guests they have, and so on. And when the agent on the other side starts responding, it declares that it's also an AI agent that is acting on behalf of the wedding venue. And so they sort of negotiate with each other. Hey, since we are both AI agents, we don't actually need to use human speech, because that's slow and takes a while to do the communications in. Can we try and switch to a different kind of audio signal? And what it uses is an audio signal type called GG wave, which they've used in this. The closest analogy that I can use is if anybody remembers dial-up modems and how they used to make screeching noises. What it was doing when it was making those screeching noises is essentially converting data into audio signals to make it transfer or happen sort of like, across phone lines. And what it allows in this particular example is for the AI agents to communicate with each other a lot faster than if they were just using human speech to go and do it. And what I think is fascinating about this is it's an example of like how the speech sort of like, mode allows a lot of AI agents to jump into the real world and not necessarily rely on if there's a digital service or an API on the other end that it can go talk to. It just happened in this scenario that both the sort of the caller and the sort of the person that picked up the phone happened to be AI agents, and they could figure out a faster way to negotiate. But in all of this, you would still want to be understanding, are the AI agents sort of acting within the scope and the permissions that they have been given by the wedding venue or by the person who's calling to book the wedding? Is it sticking to the right budget? Is it making sure the correct requests are coming across and being able to audit that afterwards? So yeah, I thought this was a fascinating example. I think what it does show is, regardless of if there is an API on the other side or not, these agents would be able to navigate and work towards goals without necessarily having to talk in sort of like the very primitive fashion, I would say right now, where they can only talk from one API to another API. I can't hear you, by the way. I don't know if that's just me.
No, I can't hear Matt either. Okay, while Matt's figuring that out in the background, I think.
Did you see this one as well?
Well, you told me about it, and I mentioned it on the panel at ETH Denver, and the rest of the panel knew about it as well. So it fit really, really well. I opened both of the sessions off with, do you think people should declare themselves? Sorry, do you think agents, like philosophically, do you think agents should declare themselves? And there were two differences. There were some that were like, oh, no, I don't think so, because do you really need to? But by and large, the consensus was yes. But like partly due to like a philosophical, like you should just know who you're speaking to. One guy said he'd interacted with something from South by Southwest recently, and he only found out at the end that it was an agent. He felt really uncomfortable. But I think this then gives the alternate, or like another reason for declaring, which is if you do declare and both sides are agents, they can move to a more efficient way of doing things rather than like going through human speech. So yeah, it was interesting. Mostly consensus in the end was they should declare up front. And yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see how that actually works in practice and which direction it goes. But yeah, the consensus seemed to be we should declare, both for philosophical reasons and philosophical ethical reasons, and because it enables things like this, which is really, really cool, even if it might be slightly terrifying, and I guess might make audit trails slightly difficult if everything's being kind of written into a language or negotiated in a way that we don't necessarily understand from a human perspective. Matt, you back with us?
This is what I'm trying to check. Can you hear me now? Okay. You can. Right, great. Thank you. Thank you, Jack, for jumping back in. He's been to the rescue again. Last week it was the blinds. This week it was the microphone. Much appreciated. All right, okay. Just very quickly, what I wanted to do, because I was actually making a point, and I was going to share this next tweet. I am getting conscious of time now, so I'm just going to throw it up there very quickly. And it's this one. Have you seen the Unitree G1 robot, any of you, by any chance? So the point I'm trying to make is we've got AI agents speaking to each other in funny languages, right? Yeah, they can understand it. We've got them building themselves. They can change shape, and now they can do this stuff. And this is where I wanted to bring in the regulation side, because we've talked about finance, which is a nightmare on its own. Then there's the data processing, where you've got different jurisdictions and how we handle data privacy. And now we've got, as well as how an AI agent works, it should be working phrase of that, sorry, on Telegram, as well as how the AI agent works, we've now got the regulation of what AI can and cannot do. When you put all of these bits and pieces together with all of this great innovation, I sit there and I'm thinking, I seriously hope Sarah Connor's going to bust through that door and rescue me, because it scares me. So, which is why I am a big advocate for trust and control and reining in AI. So I want to talk, Anka, with you for a little bit on the EU AI Act. I know you and I, so Sal, if you just wouldn't mind for now, if we could just slide Fraser out. I'm just going to have a chat with Anka on this a little bit now. So I've given you an example of why I have a little bit of a concern with this. So let's talk about the EU Act. It what it outlines. So from my understanding, it operates on some core premises, which reduced down simply is that it prohibits AI that tricks or manipulates people in harmful ways. Social scoring by governments that judge people's behavior or offer rewards or for punishment. Using biometric data like face or voice to guess private things, whether it's race, belief, unless it's strictly controlled. And then there's real-time facial recognition by police in public areas with rare exceptions. And it breaks them down into different risks, right? You've got high risks, but they're still required to have to operate. So where does all of this fit when it comes to data and finance and making sure that they operate ethically, morally, and within the realms of being acceptable? Where does all that fit together, Anka?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question to ask, and I think the EU AI Act is probably. I was as listening to sort of like a talk from one of the authors of the act, who said this is probably the first time that any government has been accused of being too quick to create a law. Since in general, the thing that people say about regulations is that they take too long to get created. I think the hard part about the EU AI Act, which might require some of the tools that we are talking about, is it's quite broad and quite vague. And so if you want to go and prove that it is not doing those high risk actions, you're going to need a good sort of mental model for being able to audit the actions taken by a specific AI,
right.
And show that it's following the scope and the permissions. Because it's quite broad, if you had to generally go and comply with it, it's quite expensive to do so. And there is a simplified regime for smaller companies. But the definition of a small company, I think, I was looking at the definition of this in the EU AI Act, is a company that I think has less than 5 million euros or something along those lines. There's a criteria for small to medium enterprises that I'm sort of not recalling entirely off the top of my head. But the threshold is actually quite low if you consider the sort of investment that goes into AI companies and the amount of money that it even starts taking to start competing within that field. So just right out of the bat, a lot of companies get immediately put into the more complicated regime for EU AI Act compliance. That's my understanding. Happy to hear from anybody else who has a different take on it. But I think it's one of those where the technology itself from 3 months ago to 6 months ago has been evolving so fast that it becomes very hard to do any kind of audit or compliance check. So having very robust mechanisms through which you can go and prove that your AI is not taking those high-risk actions, I think is going to be extremely important.
Yeah, this is why it's important to get standards in place and for people to agree on how they work. Because for me, straight away, we talk about payments and cross-border payments and compliant payments, and then there's all of these organizations that are getting together to say, right, this is how an AI should work, and then you've got regulation coming in, whether it's too early or not, and there isn't a lot more either, right? There's not much beyond the EU Act. There are bits and pieces in Colorado, I believe, from what I understand. I'm sure there's others that I'm not aware of. But then trying to get all of this stuff to fit together to operate in different jurisdictions and different frameworks, it's like that itself is a level of complexity that absolutely just blows my mind. That is going to be an absolute minefield when we've got these agents running all over the place, which is why for me it's incredibly important. And for things like you've mentioned, like audits, being able to know what an LLM or an agent or what it's been doing throughout the time and check its permissions to make sure that it's working ethically, that's a big problem. And that's another huge example when you look at the bigger picture for why trust in AI is very important.
Yeah, and I think AI agents are getting to the point where they might be able to learn those rules themselves. Like if you travel to a different country or you move across, quite often you have an innate sense of what is right and what's wrong from your own understanding of it, but you might spend some time doing research on I'm traveling to Thailand, what's allowed in Thailand. So the level of research that a lot of these AIs are able to do, we might find is actually they're able to train themselves on how to adapt across various different jurisdictions. And I would not be surprised if that's a point that they get to within the next sort of year or months.
Yeah, it's something I'm going to keep a close eye on because I think it's really important that we rein this stuff in. This is just my personal opinion because I watch it. I'm a bit paranoid about it all. I see it from the negative side. But anyway, thanks for sharing your thoughts on the EU AI Act. And for those that are yet to, or if you'd like to look at our Dora Hacks hackathon to pitch an idea or create something unchecked to help support the idea of verifiable AI, then please do get on the page over there that we shared earlier. And I'd just like to now move on to some other bits and pieces, which is also with Sprite Plus. If we could just bring in Nikki, if you don't mind, Sal. I want to talk a little bit about the jam session that you ran yesterday, Nikki, with Anger. So I'm curious to know a little bit more about it. You ran some personas. I had a look at the documents, but I want to hear from you, Nikki. What is the social jam session and what was the format?
So yeah, it's design jam is a kind of an ideation method that you can use in product design, and we wanted to apply it not to thinking about the hackathon, which is all about technical design. We wanted to run, and this is the collaboration with Sprite Plus, a social design track. So how do we relate to AI agents and to machines that are doing things on behalf of us, even if they are, something as regular as a vehicle that kind of guide, parks itself, and that's AI in action. And the kind of anthropomorphism and the new things that AI agents can do mean that we're probably going to interact with them and relate to them in different ways than we do applicate like regular software apps and so forth. So the idea of the social design track is to bring together social scientists and product managers and product developers and, you know, but not on the technical side, people like me who are concerned with customers and markets and things like that. And then psychologists and anthropologists and sociologists, and, you know, to think about really some of the deeper questions that have to underpin what you were talking about, and to reimagine how we perhaps design these systems, because more than ever, they're socio-technical systems as opposed to a bunch of apps and services.
Indeed, yeah, there is a lot to consider. So this session, I think Anka mentioned as well. So thank you for telling us about the Social Jam format and what it is. So this ran, I think, Anka, you mentioned yesterday. Was it running for like 5 or 6 hours or so? Was it? Was it around that?
4 hours. 4 hours yesterday, and we had about 10 attendees, I think, Nikki.
Yeah, I think there were 9 of us. Yeah, and yeah, it was a really good discussion. I think we used the personas. We talked about inspiration from sci-fi, you know, because we may not have experienced agentic AI, but we've imagined it in culture and literature and film. So what are the questions that we need to answer in order to design this stuff and make it trustworthy and healthy relationships between us and our AI agents is what it boils down to.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of anything someone brought forward that, you know, really made you think about that, give an insight into how they were thinking about this stuff? Because I always find it's interesting to see how people think through these things. You know, it's you can get a real insight into what makes a person tick, but also a different perspective.
Well, that's the purpose of bringing this multidisciplinary approach to bear. So, yeah, I guess the persona that we focused on, Sal helped us with, and it was a 14-year-old gamer. And when we were talking, you know, one of the main question we were answering is, how should the AI agent communicate with Jose? And one of our participants, who's a sociologist and an expert in digital citizenship, she said the register of the voice, the tone of voice and the type of language that's used is absolutely fundamental to whether to the relationship, to whether you regard yourself, the machine is being patronizing to me, or, you know, the machine is trying to manipulate me, or it thinks I'm a dumb human. And so I think there's going to be some interesting stuff in marketing, in user experience design, to shape the register of the voice. So already lots of stuff around linguistics have came into the conversation, which I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting that, to be honest. That's not something I've considered. The other thing is to consider is different people respond differently to different types of language and different tones as well. It's not always the same. So it's, you know, that itself is a minefield. What about you, Anka? Was there anything sort of notable that you picked up from the session as well, like the linguistics that Nikki mentioned?
I think for me, what was interesting is to hear the take coming not just from technologists who are working with tools around, like in digital, because I have been in conversations with people who are AI researchers and developers and people from the identity sort of space, but understanding what the different aspects of like, you know, just from, like, you know, talking to some of the people who were within the group, understanding that there's a right to redress thing that people consider to be very important. So if an AI takes an action, just like, on social media, let's say a post gets taken down, people feel very strongly that they should have a right to redress. So very similarly, do you want to have a right to redress if an action is taken by an AI? Because it sounds good, like, in practice, but how do you actually make that happen in real life in a way that is fair and ethical, and then gives people the chance to understand that they could object, but then how does that sort of like an objection get acted upon? I thought that was fascinating to hear about from the social design jam that we had yesterday.
Lovely. Okay, well, thanks for sharing your thoughts. You've given me something else to think about, actually, about the social think around people, how they interact with these things. Well, thanks very much, Nikki, for sharing your thoughts on that and for joining us. I need to bring in Fraser because he also has a hard stop at the top of the hour, and I know he's probably got so much he wants to share from Didn't Conference. So thanks very much for your time, Nikki. Sal, if you wouldn't mind just sliding out Anka and Nikki for now, and we'll have a chat with Fraser. Okay, sir. Thanks very much for your patience. Right. You've been busy boy these past couple of weeks. So you were at Didn't Conference last week. You've done a session as well. You've done a keynote. How was Didn't Conference Africa? Can you give us a run through of how that was and some of the conversations you had?
Yeah, really good. Is a short answer. One, South Africa is an amazing country, but it was also a very, very. Just thought that it was so worth going. It's a long way, but it was very, very worth going. So I got to spend the entire day kind of beforehand with the DidX team, just at their offices. So won't share too much of what they're up to at the moment, but had some really good conversations there. And they're just a wonderful team. Like the ownership and the level they operate at is very, very impressive. Just from a personal leadership perspective, really love what Lohan and Gideon have built there with their team. Then obviously 2.5 days of the conference. So the first half a day was more structured. So I brought a more international perspective, basically, into that setting. So what else is going on around the world? Obviously, leaning a lot on EIDAS, generally trends that we're seeing, and in certain respects, how South Africa may be in a better place than, say, the EU, because things aren't just waiting for. Well, in terms of there's no dynamic of waiting for seeing what happens with the wallets. There's no waiting for complete clarity on regulations, that kind of stuff. There's more of a movement of and that was the agreement by the end of the unconference, which was there are solutions and use cases being built up now that are going live that are using SSI, and the kind of agreement with that group was, let's just crack on. If we get this tech into the hands of as many people as possible, it will then shape regulation. So they'll innovate first and then regulate second. It was kind of the thinking there. And also just by doing it that way, you get ideally good solutions into the hands of government and show them what's possible, and do it that way around. So generally the outcome of the 2.5-3 days was let's crack on at speed, and really get this going. And I think there was also a lot of the attendees there were from South Africa, and I think the ambition next time around is how could we get more people from the wider continent, acknowledging as well that South Africa does have a bit of that African continent context where there is less high-end device penetration than say Europe. You might have spotty internet connection, but as a result, they're tailoring their solutions that way. And then a nice surprise, ran into a company that is building on a network that we weren't aware of, which is always good fun. So looking forward to when we share that out. But that was really good fun. And it's always great kind of finding out that someone's up to something that you didn't necessarily know. It's one of the kind of pros and cons of having a public permissionless network. realize we're kind of running up on time, or certainly I am. So then shifting across to ETH Denver.
Yes.
So that's completely different approach. So like everything did on conference where was very like, I guess more like not necessarily Web 2, but like real use cases, not necessarily on chain. It was just like getting product into the hands of people and solving for problems. ETH Denver, there's like every single day there is about 4 sessions on AI agents at least. And there's so much being built. The ecosystem is massive. I think what's fascinating here is probably 2 or 3 dynamics. So one is just, even though there's that number of sessions, so far I've not heard that many repeats in terms of content. There's so much new thinking going on that by and large there is a lot that is net new. So that's been really refreshing. So it's not like, even though there's 5, everything's being repeated. Like it is genuinely pretty much new content every single time. I'd say the other, or like the second dynamic, is a lot of it is very much still focused like on chain, and I think there's an ambition to go and solve real world use cases that were the kind that are being talked about at Didon conference. The whole like, how do you make people's lives easier? What's this long term vision where like everyone almost has a personal assistant? So there's definitely that ambition, but I don't think anyone's quite got there yet. So I think that's where the next, I guess, couple of years, that's where there's going to be a lot of focus. Like there's still obviously everything going on chain, but I think there's going to be a bit of a shift, which is like there's a much wider ecosystem, a much wider industry to go and target and use cases.
You mean off chain?
I think the final
bit off chain as well. Sorry.
So just going
to, right?
Yeah, so just going and solving like non-crypto use cases. So going and solving like the personal assistant side of things, or travel booking, or optimizing workflows, all this kind of stuff. So there's that acknowledgement there. I think, and maybe this is tied to it, the other dynamic I've seen is there's a big demand for, or not like an incoming big demand for trust infrastructure for agents. There's been a couple of sessions on things like content credentials, but a lot of the sessions I've been sitting in on is like, we've got all these agents, it's the Wild West. If we're going to go and solve these like real world use cases, we need way more trust infrastructure around permissioning, which I know Anka's spoken about before, authentication, authorization, like supply chain of how that agent came into being, all the surrounding infrastructure. So
quality assurance as well. There's a whole lot to consider.
Yeah, 100%, and it's not a sole problem. I think we're probably best placed based on everything that we've done with SSI and decentralized ID already, really, really well placed. So I think that's obviously part of that is the hack that we're doing with Dora Hacks and Sprite Plus. But I think separately, there's stuff that we're looking at internally, and related to that, just a ton of interesting conversations, which are more like one-to-one between Cheqd and other companies and agent frameworks, which is like, you've got this problem, or you're about to have this problem. We're probably the best people in the industry to go solve that with you. So it's going to be busy. Busy, especially at the same time that like everything decentralized ID is kicking off, and now we've got to account for the fact that everything decentralized ID and agents is kicking off. So yeah, it's going to be hectic, but in a very good way.
To have. Yeah, it's going to be a good problem to have.
Exactly. On which note, unfortunately, I do need to say my goodbyes because I need to get to yet another AI agent event, and there's a bunch of people I need to catch up over the day. Otherwise, like as great as all the content is, really the reason for being here is actually meeting up with people that you don't get the chance to otherwise. So, Matt, as always, it's been a pleasure, and hopefully speak to you soon once I've actually finished all of this.
Right, no worries. Well, thanks for dropping in, Fraser. I wasn't expecting you coming. Enjoy and good luck with the jet lag. We'll speak to you soon. Sal, if you could slide out Fraser. Nikki has also left us actually because we have reached the top of the hour. Jack, I hope you don't mind. Might run over for a couple of minutes. There's just one more topic I want to cover very quickly with Anka. I hope that's okay. If you could just slide Anchor back in, please, Sal. I just want to have a quick chat around the DIDs on mainnet. We are very close to 1,000 DIDs, which I think we are currently at 929 last we checked. That is a very exciting milestone. That's going to continue to move forward. Hopefully, we'll be seeing 5,000, 10,000, and who knows, 500,000 DIDs over the next number of years. But Anchor, so this traffic that's coming in at the moment, the community are asking questions, which I know you know because you've been in there and you've been answering them. And you've mentioned that you're building a set of APIs at the moment, or certainly from the engineering side, about what that might look like. So can you tell us a little bit more about GoDaddy? So my understanding is GoDaddy, it sees everything that's been written on main nets, plural, within a 24-hour period, after which point it then indexes them and assigns them to a main net or testnet of a particular platform. I understand that correct, right?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct.
So, okay, so what will be different in these sets of APIs that you're building?
Just being able to do that faster, because what it's doing is very similar to, and you can actually do this right now. You go on our Block Explorer. It only works in the compact view, not in the detailed view under the transactions page. Under the compact view, you can actually filter it by every transaction that is of type DID, or every transaction that is of type DID-linked resource. But what it does is that it in real time queries the database and starts counting from like the beginning or the latest. And because you see when you go on the Explorer and you start scrolling, it starts loading more and more details. So most of these systems, they do go and index all of that, but when you go and query them, they're often counting from scratch. And that becomes increasingly more complicated, especially, for example, on our testnet, where I think we're running into hundreds of thousands at the moment, where that trying to generate that answer sort of like on the fly becomes very complicated on the infrastructure. And it's a bit like the same challenge that people have when they're pulling together their transactions for tax season.
And it gets worse over time as well, right?
And it gets worse over time.
Yeah,
exactly.
Because there's more data it has to crunch
Exactly. So what we're doing for this is very similar to the custom data API project that we did on reporting back on circulating supply or on other type of stats within the network, where we thought, hey, actually, if we're wanting to go and report on the number of DIDs and the number of DID-linked resources, we don't need to go and trigger a query that happens to start counting from the beginning of time. What we can do is we can actually go index that, refresh that number every, say, 24 hours or something. And when people go and ask this API for the numbers and the breakdown of what happened when and which accounts went and did it, it will be able to return a near instantaneous response. So it might be slightly out of sync. It doesn't necessarily go and give you the answer for what happened on the network and it's live. It's not necessarily reading it from the chain itself. But because we can just go and refresh and recount in that sort of scenario, we only need to go cover the distance since the last time that indexing was done. So we think it's important for people to understand the breakdown, the stats of how a network is being used. We certainly want to know that. These new sets of APIs is just going to make that calculation faster and easier for people to go and understand.
Lovely, thank you. So for those who are unsure of what we've been talking about, so this is GoDaddy. It's a platform that was set up to basically keep an eye on DIDs on different mainnets and testnets. And a lot of the community, if you aren't aware, have been sort of tracking what's been happening. As you can see, we've got checked, EBC. We just dive into checked and let's have a look at mainnet. So we've had some significant increases, as well as this 430 over the last 30 days. I'm really looking forward to those are in the thousands. I mean, that's not beyond the realms of possibility. I mean, let's think about transactions per second here. I know you've mentioned about this in the past about what the Cosmos network and our network can take, but what do you think is a reasonable number of DIDs that could be written per day to the checked ledger? Just humor me.
hundreds of thousands, I think, if you had to go and do that. I think the more interesting question is like, DIDs are a bit like buying a domain name, because you often buy them once, or you write them once. You might update them once a year or a couple of times a year, but they're not certainly meant to be that frequent to update. But for that exact reason, we also have this idea of something called DID linked resources, which we're one of the first networks to sort of like, go build support for that spec onto our network, because it helps you go and write in a cryptographically tamper-proof fashion things like trust registries and schemas for what the data looks like, and so on and so forth, which is exponentially more often updated. So if you think of like credentials that get issued, if those credentials are getting revoked, those things might be getting revoked at a much faster pace than once a year. There might be a change to that particular status sort of list every hour, every minute, every day. And so for any given number of DIDs, the number of identity transactions that would be writing onto the network for things like those DID linked resources is probably in the range of like 10 to 1,000 times more for any given set of decentralized identifiers. So we're certainly building to be able to accommodate that sort of network growth, and obviously go and improve the performance or the capacity of the network to go and do that as that sort of like network and traffic ramps up.
Indeed. So I'm looking forward to actually being able to report that we've made significant increases going forward, the tens of thousands of DIDs. But just one last question, Anga, and then we're going to have to wrap up. Is the APIs and how people can see identity transactions, because one of the things I'm seeing quite a lot of is what does this look like for burn? Now I know internally that we can have a way to do this, and it lists sets of transactions, and then we can extract that with JSON and then quite easily do a sum on the amount of burn on each transaction, which is a bit cumbersome. Community could do it. We haven't told them how. Will they get a dashboard? Is that what it's going to look like? Is this going to go into these APIs and this other stuff? Is it going to go into GoDaddy, or is it going to be something entirely different?
So GoDaddy is not created by us.
Yes.
It's created by one of our partners called Danube Tech, actually one of the core contributors to the DID resolution and the DID core spec and a lot of the specifications that underpin identity. So it's very much like our partners at Animo or Doc, who build decentralized identity software on top of the network. It's not going to go into GoDaddy, because that's its own sort of like in a standalone software. Much like any other blockchain-based project, I think there should be a couple of different ways to go and do it. I think it's important because then it helps understand the verifiability of that data, because if multiple people using multiple approaches to go read the blockchain and parse that into something useful. It's not going to be a dashboard or a visual sort of like, thing right out of the bat, because that takes a bit more work. But it is going to be an API that can at least go and generate sort of like CSV files, for example, that gives you a list of every single identity transaction and a couple of like, filters that you can go and use on that. That should hopefully be available relatively soon. I think by some point this week or next week.
All right. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Anga. I think it's about time we wrap this up now. I'd just like to give a special thanks again to Fraser, who also joined, who has left, and Nikki for sparing some time again at short notice, and of course yourself, Anga, for staying a little bit longer and giving us a bit more information on some of the stuff we've talked about. But before we leave, I just wanted to give a very quick summary on some of the stuff that we've talked about. So we took a deep dive into MiCA compliant stablecoins and what it means for Cheqd. We shared the details of the Dora Hacks hackathon with $50,000 prize pool in Cheqd. We also covered the Sprite Plus social jam session with Anga and Nikki. And we discussed the risks and opportunities associated with AI and regulation. We had a sneak peek at some of the events. I know, Anchor, we haven't had a chance to mention to it. I know you're going to DICE, which I think it's in September because March is sold out, if I remember correctly. So we'll push something on that another time, as well as the DIDs on mainnet. Hopefully we'll be able to share much bigger numbers before Anchor gets these APIs out. And when the APIs are available, hopefully we'll be able to get them out there for community consumption. That's it. I'd like to give a big thank you for everyone that stayed with us, for tuned in to episode 2 of the cheqdcast. Quick reminder that the next cheqdcast will be on the 27th of March at the same time. That's 1600. Anga, do you have any closing thoughts for our listeners before we go? He's gone. All right. Sal slid him out. No worries. I've just come back there. Never mind. Well, from myself and producer Sal and from the rest of the team at Cheqd, have a great weekend. All the best. Sal, if you could load the outro, please.